Professor Reed, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
First of all, can you define marketing in the context of the business world?
Absolutely. Marketing is really the process by which we as business people communicate things about our products that increase interest, that make consumers aware of our products, and that really encourage them to try to appeal to their decision to buy our products. And marketing is really the fundamental glue, if you will, of any business. Because if you think about it, marketing is essential to really generating interest, awareness, opportunity to buy, and actual purchase decisions in consumers. And you can have a great product, and if nobody knows about it, then it really doesn't matter. So marketing is that process by which we communicate and promote our products and brands and services to consumers.
Okay, so what is a brand?
So it's interesting. A brand is essentially a set of ideas that are associated with a product. So when you think, for example, of Apple, you think about what comes to mind when I think about Apple products, for example, iPod, iPhone, iPad. Well, certain things immediately jump to your head, right? And so those things that might be things such as anti-establishment or hip or cool or sleek products or creativity. These are ideas that essentially make up what the brand means to people. And so a brand is essentially a set of cohesive ideas or thoughts that really define what the product stands for. The idea is once you have a set of ideas that really define what your brand stands for, you want to make sure that your brand is different from other brands. So for example, Apple tries to say that we are creative, we are hip, we are cool, we are sexy. And Microsoft, for example, is not. So Microsoft is this other sort of thing that's out there that is stodgy and less exciting and very routine. And so you try to create interest by differentiating your brand from other possible competitive brands that consumers might be interested in.
So help us better understand your specialty. You are an identity theorist. So how does that relate to brand identity?
Well, my training is in social psychology. So I have a PhD in social psychology, and I study how people connect with symbols. And so if you think about it, how does a person express who they are? Well, one of the things they might do is they might choose certain bundles, if you will, of products that create an impression that they can communicate to other people. So for example, if you believe you are a skater boy, you are going to be drawn towards certain brands that you think represent that lifestyle. Mm-hmm. And so the types of brands that are symbolic of who you think you are or who you aspire to be will become very appealing to you. And those brands that then become symbols of your identity are brands that you are going to be most loyal to and deeply connected with and really emotionally tied to, because they're not just brands and symbols, they are a sense of who you are, and they are part and parcel with your self-concept. So just having those brands and consuming those brands in the presence of other people is a very powerful way for you to express who you are. And so I try to study this notion of what we refer to as identity loyalty, which is creating this sense of connection through your sense of who you want to be and your self-concept, and how a brand can develop and leverage that as a strategy to becoming popular and growing its market amongst consumers.
So what are some of the triggers that lead consumers to become loyal to a product, brand, or logo? Mm-hmm. And can you give some examples that might resonate with teenagers?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, there's lots of brands that are out there. And some of the triggers that are important in this notion of creating a sense of identity, a sense of expression through the brands that you use, are that they have to be seen as authentic. Okay, so a brand has to be seen as part of this lifestyle that's connecting with consumers. So an example of this would be, if you look at a particular niche category of branding, such as, let's say Red Bull. Mm-hmm. So Red Bull tends to be associated with, for example, this kind of extreme sports lifestyle. Okay, so the idea is that if a brand is going to be allowed to come into that community and be adopted, it must be seen as authentic by the people who feel they are the core users or the core representatives of that lifestyle. So one issue is authenticity. The other issue is associated with having to do with really creating a deep connection of caring about what that brand community is all about. So if a company comes in and tries to become symbolic of that group, if it's seen as a way of attempting to just try to make money, then it's going to be rejected. So there has to be, and this is tied into this authenticity idea, it has to be seen as a genuine kind of brand that in and of itself is really interested in the lifestyle per se that it is trying to create a connection with for those consumers. The third thing that's really important is that there has to be some kind of emotional connection to this. And so when the brand advertises to its consumers, it wants to kind of depict how it is part and parcel with this lifestyle in a way that generates the kind of emotional reactions or affective reactions that consumers tend to associate with the desire to be a part of that lifestyle. And so those three elements are sort of the starting points by which brands can become deeper triggers for essentially allowing consumers to try to self-identify and express who they are through the usage of those brands.
So how do you develop relationships with actual corporations through your research and your work in the classroom? In particular, I know you've done some work with Saucony, the sneaker maker.
Typically, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is actually one of the high points for me as an academic, and that is the opportunity to marry research, teaching, and interfacing with real-world companies. And so typically what I do in my courses, both at the undergraduate and the graduate level, is I will partner with a company, and the company will come into my class with their problem. And my students then, I will teach them about the tools associated, for example, with understanding why consumers do what they do. And these tools then will be applied by the students to the company's particular situation. And so what happens then as we go throughout the semester, the students are essentially learning how these tools work, why they work, but they're really getting the opportunity to learn by doing and applying these tools to a really difficult real-world situation in a situation that matters. So the company typically comes to us with a sort of mission-critical issue that they're currently dealing with. And so it's a really nice interface because there's 3 points of utility in doing this. And that is obviously by interacting with companies, companies get exposure to sort of the top talent in terms of the young minds that are going to be coming out soon, potentially looking for jobs with those companies. The students get a big sort of boost from this sort of project idea because they actually feel like what they're doing is not isolated in some ivory tower, but it's really learning that's being applied that actually matters in the real world. And then thirdly, by interfacing sort of consumers and my students, there's an opportunity to actually teach consumers more about marketing and more about how business works in the real world. So it's a really nice interface between those three elements that I think is win-win-win for everybody.
And how did Saucony become involved?
So Saucony last year was very much interested in trying to understand how to make its brand particularly relevant to young high school kids who are scholarly students and athletes. So the question that they came to me with was, Americus, we want to understand how to deeply connect emotionally with this particular segment or group of consumers. And so the job of my class was then to do a very thorough analysis as to how do high school students, scholarly high school student athletes, make decisions about purchasing shoes. And so Saucony was interested in understanding that and figuring out a way then to brand and communicate a message to that particular group that would make them interested and excited and potentially loyal to the Saucony brand. And so it was a very nice interface again of my students being able to go out and talk to high school students and understand how they make decisions about buying shoes. What brands do they like? Where does Saucony fit in their list of popular brands for thinking about purchasing shoes? And how can you make Saucony jump to the top of that list over competitors such as Reebok, Nike, Adidas, Puma, so on and so forth. So it was a great project in the end, and again, it had this sort of win-win-win aspect to it in terms of myself, the company, my students at the University of Pennsylvania, and the high school students who participated in the research intended to understand how they make decisions.
So what were your interests in high school, and how did that set you on a career path toward marketing and toward college level instruction?
Yeah, my interest in high school, I was actually more interested in music and art. And what I was particularly interested in is music because I found myself interested in understanding how patterns work. And music is really about patterns. You take particular parts of notes and you put them together and you create a pattern that sounds appealing to people. So I've always had this idea of like what makes patterns stand out and what makes particular patterns work as a good piece of music versus not. And so when I got into my latter sort of stages of my musical career, I started understanding that I like to figure out how these patterns emerge and how then these patterns play out in a larger place. So the marketplace is actually an analogy that works with this. So there are different consumer groups, and they're doing different things, there are different patterns. And your idea is to try to understand how do these patterns come about, and what are the combinations of patterns then that really describe how that market works. And I found that there's an interesting interface between business and creativity that allows me to, and marketing is a huge piece of this, because a lot of what is about marketing is about the creative aspect. You analyze, but you also have to create something that's appealing. So it has this really nice, interesting mix of kind of right and left brain skill sets. And what I really like about that is that marketing, again, going back to the original discussion that we were having, is so fundamental to what anyone wants to do, right? So brands are products, brands are also people. You yourself, you're a brand. You're trying to convince people to give you a job or persuade someone to go out with you on a date. You're your brand. So you have to figure out, how do I market myself? How do I do these different things? And so because marketing has such huge creative aspects to it, and it's so fundamental to just the human existence, it sort of drew me into this area where I could try to learn and study and understand this set of concepts associated with marketing more clearly, and how those patterns then play out in a business sort of setting.
Fascinating. How was your involvement in music related to, did you play an instrument?
Yes.
Or what kind of instrument?
So I play two instruments. I play classical guitar, and I also play drums and percussion. So drums and percussion I've done for the longer of those two types of music. And again, that ties into this notion of patterns. We also actually in our department, our marketing department at the Wharton School, we actually have a band.
Oh, you do?
Yes, we do. And it consists of my colleagues and I, and we play for the students too. So I'm still doing music, but in a slightly different way, but still excited about having that sort of side of creativity that I can express as well as part of my own identity.
Terrific. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.